Hey guys, so we've been doing some work with fractions. We did some geometry, we did a little bit on percents and shopping and tips. So today I thought it would be great if we took a look at some decimals. So let's do that. And you should have one of these or maybe even two in your supplies. If you have two, you can use more than one. That'll double your chances. And how you win, it's kind of like a bingo game. And as we get answers, if you have the answers, you just put an X through where you're at. And if you get a column all full, any of the columns or any of the rows, you just need to have one, or the four corners, then you're a winner. So at the end, we'll keep track of how many boxes that you got all together. Sometimes I don't win, but we just count the number of boxes, and then at least we see how many that we got correct. So let's get started, and we're going to mix up the cards that I have over here. And I'm just going to randomly start from the middle, and then from that point I'll go from the top. Okay, so the very first card says we have 4 plus 2.5. Now, when you have decimals, if you are given a whole number 4, there is actually still a decimal after that number. So there's 4.0 plus 2.5. And you might know this already. So if you do, great. It's a great review. If you don't, then you just add straight down. Bring your decimal straight down. And my answer is 6.5. So for my first card, my answer is 6.5. I want to look over here at my card. I don't see 6.5 anywhere on my card, so I don't get to cross anything out. So we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so let's do the next. 1.2 plus 0.8. So for our second problem, we have 1 and 2/10. It's the correct way to say this number. 1 and 2/10. Plus 0 and 8/10. So anytime you have a decimal, you can use the word and. You line them up with the decimals always when you're adding and subtracting. We're going to add straight down. We get 10, carry the 1, add straight down, and we actually get the number 2.0, which also is the same as just saying 2. So 2.0 or 2. If you have either of those numbers, then you can cross it out on your chart. And I don't again. So moving right along, let's go to another one. Let's take a look at a little bit bigger problem. Here I have 11.6 or 11 and 6/10 and 14 and 4/10. 11 and 6/10 and 14 and 4/10. And again, notice that I'm lining up these decimals. Now when I add straight down, I will have 10, carry the 1, this will be 6, and then 2. And finally, I'll bring my decimal down, and I have 26.0 or 26 and 0/10, which just is 26. Again, if you have just all zeros after the decimal point, you can drop that decimal point. So the number 26. And again, I still don't have any on my box. Hopefully you're doing better than I am. Let's go on. Maybe I'll have better luck on the next one. So next, let's try a true or false. True or false? 1 and 65/100 is smaller than 1 and 5/10. I'm going to show you how to compare these. 1 and 65/100 and 1 and 5/10. Now, whenever you're comparing decimals, a lot of times it's better if you make them the same number after the decimal place. So what do I mean by that? Well, this one has 2 after the decimal place. This only has 1. So I'm going to fill this in with a 0. Always a 0. Okay, I'm going to fill this in with a 0. Now, when I'm comparing these decimals, I'll compare the first numbers, and they're the same. So once they're the same, that tells me I can move on to the next. So I'm going to use my paper and just cover it up a little bit. Now, since they are the same amount of places past the decimal, I can just cover up those decimals. 65 and 50. Which one is bigger, 65 or 50? Well, we know that 65 is greater than 50. So that would mean that 1.65 would be greater than 1.5, or 1 5/10. So 1 65 hundredths is greater than 1 5/10. So the answer to this is false. So yay, I finally get to cross one out. Now, if you have more than one false on there, you only get to cross one out at a time. So let's see. I have to decide which one. I'm going to cross my one on the corner, so maybe it will help me get 4 corners. All right, let's try again. Let's do another. Let's try this one. Now I have 8 75 hundredths minus 1. All right. For some reason, we often get confused when we have a number that has a decimal in it and then a number that doesn't. But remember, if you have a whole number that doesn't, it's a whole number, so it stays before the decimal. And then again, I do always think that if you have it the same number of decimal places, it's just a lot easier to see when you're subtracting. So if I subtract these two, now I have 5, 7, and then this will be 7. So I have 7 and 75 hundredths. 7 and 75 hundredths. Why am I saying hundredths? The 5 is in a hundredths place. Remember, we go tens, hundredths. So 7 and 75 hundredths. We often say 7.75 to be lazy, honestly. But we should say it correctly. 7 and 75 hundredths. All right. I don't have it on there. I have 7 and 85 hundredths. That doesn't help me. Hopefully you have it on there and you're able to cross something out. All right, let's take a look at another. This one's a little bit tricky. Here we have 1 minus 65 hundredths. Okay, 1 minus 65 hundredths. Let's take a look. Let's see, this is our sixth one. 1 minus 65 hundredths. How do I line that up? Well, remember, 1 doesn't have a decimal, so I'm going to put a decimal after it, because below that I have a decimal and 65 hundredths. So I need to fill my zeros in up here so that I have them the same amount of places past the decimal. So again, a great hint for you whenever you're working with decimals, adding and subtracting, it is so much more helpful if you make them the same amount of places past the decimal. And you can do that by filling them in with zeros afterwards. Okay, so now I'm going to subtract. And when I subtract just as if I'm subtracting whole numbers. I don't pay any attention to the decimal at first. This again is tricky because this is where we have to borrow. This becomes 10. Borrow from the 10, it becomes 9, and this is 10. And that always is confusing. So again, we're borrowing from the 1, it becomes 0. Move this over to 10. I need to borrow from the 10, it becomes 9, and now this becomes 10. So after I get through that, I have 10 minus 5, which is 5. 9 minus 6, which is 3. And then this is a 0. So 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 6 is 3. Now the great thing about addition and subtraction is you can check them. Whenever you subtract two numbers and get an answer, you can add these two numbers to see if you got what you started with, and that would be your double check. So we want to know if this is going to be our answer. And how I can figure that out is if I add these two together and get what I have on the top, then that is my correct answer. So 5 plus 5 is 10. I'm going to carry my 1. Again, I'm not looking at the top anymore. So 5 plus 5 is 10. And now 6, my carried 1 is 7, 8, 9, 10. So I do get what I started with, 1. That tells me that I'm right. And I love math when you can know exactly when you're right, because if you're taking a test, then you know for sure that you got the problem right and you can move on. So our answer, back to our answer, is 35 hundredths. 0.35, which is 35 hundredths. I'm looking on mine. I don't see 35 hundredths. I'm still not doing too well. I sure hope you're doing a lot better. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Let's try another true or false. True or false? Number 7. If I have 22 and 37 hundredths, and I'm comparing it with 22 and 375 thousandths. Compare them. Okay. I said it over and over. I'll say it again. We want to put a 0 here, and that way we can compare these numbers. All right. Now this is saying 22 and 37 hundredths is greater than the bottom. So we want to find out if this top number is greater than the bottom. And how we do that is we just start comparing going across. They're both 22, so we know that that's the same. Now, when we get to our decimal, remember from before, we say 370 and 375. Which one's greater? Well, obviously 375 is greater, so that means that this is bigger than this one. Now, if that's a little much for you, you can keep going and say, well, the 3s are the same, the 7s are the same. Now, which is bigger, 0 or 5? 5 is obviously bigger, so 5 is bigger, so that means this is bigger than this. So this should be greater than this. So this would be false, because this says that 22 and 37 hundredths is greater than 22 and 375 thousandths. So that is for sure false. So we get to cross off another false on our paper. Hopefully you have one and you can cross that out. Okay, well, we're going to get moving, keep getting moving. Hopefully you're doing well. I'm going to go to the next one, and let's try this. Let's say we have 3 and 5 tenths plus 3 and 5 tenths. Okay, number 8. 3 and 5 tenths plus 3 and 5 tenths. Well, again, lining up the decimals. This one's nice because I don't have to add any filler zeros, and I can just add straight down. I get 5 plus 5 is 10. Carry the 1. 3 plus 3 is 6. Add 1, I get 7. And my decimal is right here. So I have 7.0, which is the same as just the number 7. Okay, 7.0 is the same as the number 7. So I'm looking on my paper. No luck for me again. So I need to hope that maybe in the next couple ones will help me out. All right, so let's take a look at this one. Here I have number 9. Number 9 says 0 and 4 tenths. 0 and 6 tenths. Okay, I'm going to add straight down, and we have 4 plus 6 is 10. Add straight down, I get 1. So 1.0, which is the same as what? Hopefully you remember, 1.0 is the same as just saying 1. So I don't have to put a decimal here at all. Just the same as 1. And yay, I finally have one on my paper that I can cross out. And I finally have 1 on my paper, and it happens to be the number 1. So I'm crossing it out. Moving on to the next one. We have a few more minutes here, so I'm going to keep going. Hopefully we can continue There we go. We have number 10 is 3 7/75 plus 4 5/10. Notice that I line the decimals up. When I'm adding and subtracting, I'm always lining the decimals up. Adding and subtracting, lining those decimals up. I'm going to go ahead and put in a filler 0 because I like to have my decimals the same number of places past the decimal. It just makes them look so much nicer. And now I'm going to add straight down. I have 5, I have 12, carry the 1, and now I have 8. 3 plus 4 is 7, plus 1 is 8. And I bring this decimal point straight down, and I have 8 25/100. 8 25/100. So I look on my paper. I'm disappointed again. I don't have anything on there like 8 25/100. So I'm moving to the next one. All right, here we go. I'm hoping that somebody is going to at least get a column or a row. Let's try another little challenging one. Let's try 2 minus 1.6. Number 11. 2. Now, I see the other one has a decimal, so I should probably put a decimal after my 2. Minus 1 6/10. Now, hopefully you're thinking, well, just put a 0 here because that's what we want to do. Keep them the same number of places past the decimal. And now I'm going to subtract. Well, 0 minus 6. I need to borrow 1 from my 2 and bring that over here and make this 10. So I'm actually borrowing a tens place. So I'm going to bring this over here. 10 minus 6 is now 4. And 1 minus 1 is 0. So I have 0 4/10. 0 4/10. Now the interesting thing is sometimes people say, well, you really don't need that 0 here. But it's kind of common practice that if there isn't a number there that you put a 0 here. And if someday you take the SAT test to go to college, they will count it wrong if you don't put the 0 here on some problems. So you need to make sure you have your 0 4/10. And I'm looking over here and I do not have that. Unfortunately, I have 5/10, 0 5/10, but that doesn't help me. I have 0 1/10, that doesn't help me either. So again, moving along. I think we have time for maybe 2 more. So let's do 2 more. Let's try this one. All right, number 12. We have 2 10/100. Interesting. Now see, they didn't have to put the 0 here. It could have been 2 1/10, but with the 0 here, it's 2 10/100. And then we're going to add to that 1 23/100. So they were nice enough to make them the same number of places past the decimal. Now I'm going to add straight down 3, 3, and 3. 3 33/100. 3 33/100. Again, no luck for me, so I'm going to move on. Okay, this next one's going to be our last one, so I'm going to mix them up, and we'll see what's next. Mix them up, mix them up, mix them up. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Number 13. 15 5/10 plus 10 7/5. 15 5/10 plus 10 7/5. Okay, so we have 5. We have 12. Carry the 1. This becomes 6. And now this becomes 2. So 26 25/100. 26 25/100. Darn, I see I have 28 25/100. I have 15 25/100, but I don't have a 26 25/100. So that's all I have. I'm not doing too well. So that was number 13. I think ending on number 13 wouldn't be a good idea, so let's do one more for the end. Here we go. 14 28 and 75 hundredths minus 3 and 5 tenths. Now, right away, I say they're not the same number of places past the decimal. I need to add a 0 here. So I'm going to add my 0. And now when I subtract, I will have 5, 2, 5, 2. So 25 and 25 hundredths. 25 and 25 hundredths. For me, no luck. I have the 28 and 25 hundredths, the 15 and 25 hundredths. I even have 6 and 25 hundredths. I even have 25 hundredths, but not 25 and 25 hundredths. So that's it for me. And now at the top of my page, I'm going to put how many boxes was I able to cross out. I was only able to cross out 3 boxes. So I would like for you in the comment section today to show that you participated in our game. Let me know how many boxes you were able to cross out. And I will see you next time. So peace. This is Doc. See you next week.